with Julia Herz of the Brewers Association. If you're just joining us, please feel free to use the chat room as a place to banter with each other as you would. Ask questions, share what you're drinking, share whatever you'd like. That's what this space is all about. A little education, a little entertainment, a little edutainment, if you will. And we'll get started shortly. Julia's drinking a hazy IPA, right? What are you drinking? What did you say you were drinking?
The One-E from Oscar Blues, Original Lions, Colorado Brewery. 100 calories, hazy.
Let's see. Someone's drinking a Heather Ale. Ooh, Lucas, of course, Lucas. Ray's got homebrewed Saison. That sounds tasty. Church Street Doppelbock. That sounds delicious. Homemade Applejack. A lot of homebrew we have in here, actually, Julia. We've been doing these virtual events since mid-March, and there's been a lot of homebrew consumption.
Homebrewing's up during the whole COVID thing.
Sure.
And I love it. I have one in my cooler. I didn't even think to bring it. I have I called it a Baltic Red because as a home brewer, I didn't have enough in my recipe to bump it up to that Baltic Porter style. I kind of got spaced when I was grinding the grains in the shop somehow. Yeah. But it turned out great, gorgeous red, and then I put choke cherries in it. So there is what an innovation in beer. Choke cherry Baltic Red. I mean, come on, guys. It's gorgeous. And it's been lagering for like more than a year, actually, not 6 months. It's really smooth, super fun one.
Nice. Well, I think that's a great segue to get started. We're doing this with Julia today, well, because she's a force of nature when it comes to the beer world. It's American Craft Beer Week, so this is a good time to have a chat with someone who is all-knowing about craft beer. I had the pleasure of knowing Julia for a number of years now, meeting at various beer conferences here and there, and at different events here and there. And then Julia was also a part of the Brewseum's Beer Culture Summit, which was a 4-day gathering here in Chicago in October, and supported by the Brewers Association's involvement with the Smithsonian, the Beer Initiative program happening there with Teresa McCullough, which we'll get to at another event in the future. So Julia, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Liz. And last time we were together, we were on that very patio at Metropolitan, where the loggers just wouldn't quit, and neither would we. It was such a fun night.
I think we were drinking a lot of Zwickel that night.
Yeah, the Zwickel, man, I was blown away by how well they are doing what they do.
They're an awesome brewery. Yeah, so I'm on the deck here at Metropolitan to have this chat with Julia. Before we get into all of this meaty stuff with craft beer and homebrew and American craft beer, I think I always like to hear people's story. Everyone has a story. How did you get to working in beer?
Everyone does have their beer story, right? And I look at all the names on Zoom, and you guys could and should share your story too. I will shorten the answer. My brother had a beer can collection before I was 10. So he was dumpster diving and getting cans and bottles and these really cool packages. And I was little, always watching him do that. My parents would take us to the Brickskeller in Washington, D.C. that's no longer open. Then it formerly became the Beer Baron. I don't know if it's still going strong. And that place had more than 500 beers on the menu. And we would have happy parents. They were always happy when we were at the Brickskeller drinking beer. And they were doing it around food. And my brother was getting special, cans or bottles that he was trying to collect. And he still has that collection. Then I started homebrewing in my 20s. And then when I moved to Colorado, I got connected with my local homebrew shop, which was owned at the time by 2 people, John Arthur, who's no longer around, and Paul Gatza. And I was hooked. I was getting recipes from Paul and John and started brewing. And then when I worked at the Brewers Association, I met amazing people like Ray Daniels, who's on the Zoom. And ever since, I've walked in the footsteps of many great beer people to advocate and educate to advance the beverage, within the world and within the breweries that we all get to frequent.
So are you still home brewing?
I am. I have a recipe in the mix from Charlie Papazian himself. He sent it to me last week because I hounded him to get it. And last time I was hanging with Charlie, we were on his pre-COVID. Last summer, at least at his house hanging out, we were drinking this very beer, and it's a German pils that Charlie Americanized with some hops and Charlie spin like only he can do, and I still think about that beer. So the fact that I have it on paper now, I told him I'd honor the recipe and brew it. And I was going to brew for AHA Big Brew, American Homebrewers Association. We had 1,000+ brewers, homebrewers brewing beer last May 2nd, last weekend. But I was kind of COVID crazy, and I had to break out. And me, my husband, and my 14-year-old, we rented a camper van and went camping because I had to get out of the house. So I missed Big Brew. So I will still honor that and brew it in the next few weeks.
Yeah, well, let me know how that goes. I'm excited to hear about that whole process. We're also here, like I said, because it's American Craft Beer Week. And it's kind of myself, I always tell people this, I think that anything past like 1900 is too soon, too new, right? But the great thing about what the BA does and a lot of this, these movements with craft beer and this effort and this work with craft beer is that it's really sort of the next generation, right, of things that have already existed in the past. And I'm very familiar with that 17th, 18th, 19th century era of making alcohol. But when we look at the United States and sort of this phase 2, this really is the greatest time to be a beer lover. And I'm hoping that you could maybe tell us a little bit about the story of craft beer as we know it today.
Yeah, and I love the history tie-in, right? Because we're all busy making history as we are in the moment of now. And looking back helps us look forward. And there's so much history in beer, and we finally have this history movement. I know Chicago, through Liz, your efforts, and the Brewseum, and many people that are surrounded with what you guys are doing as a community, want Chicago to be kind of the U.S. history capital for beer. And boy, coming through the event at the Brewseum that I attended was mind-blowing on what an intersection for history the location of Chicago is and beer. Based on rail travel, right, and the river there, and everything coming and emerging through transportation and availability of ingredients, and location in Milwaukee and Detroit. There's so much going on. But yet, beyond the past history that we learn from about beer and how we advance and learn more about ourselves as well, is the modern era. And you mentioned Teresa McCullough, actually being one of the lead staffers behind that project, the Brewing History Initiative, with the Smithsonian, which is the largest or the most visited history museum in the world. And the National Museum of American History gets 4.5 million people a year. Julia Child's Kitchen is the most visited destination within that area. Then we now have home brewing, Charlie Papazian's Spoon, Ken Grossman's Notebook, Fritz Maytag's Microscope. You've got so much brewing and home brewing now being cataloged and honored at the highest level, and looking at it as historic. It's so cool. And that whole Brewing History Initiative is focused on brewing in the United States, home brewing and craft brewing, 1960 to today. And so I think I've seen emerge since that movement or that project got going, and things like Brewseum and so many other state efforts, these history efforts within each state popping up saying, we need to capture the history that's being brewed right here. And the movement has really come on strong, I think, in the last 5 years. And it's been super cool to watch. And we, on our own end of the Brewers Association, catalog more than 100,000 photos. We have an archive of interviews, brewing pioneers, more than 140 of them. We have a documentary on home brewing for the love of craft that really documents more of the modern history, post-prohibition, and even early, later than that. You got to look at brewing when New Albion started in California, You had Anchor in the mix. You had Sierra, that little mecca, right? 1965 on, really where things started to pop. And it's a fascinating thing to learn about. And then you can also talk beer styles too and the history there.
I know that when I went to DC for the opening of the beer exhibit at the National Museum of American History, I was really excited to see the exhibit, but was I beelining for that Julia Child kitchen, let me tell you. So I saw it all going down in real time. So yeah, 1960s, you have Northern California being a little enclave of these home brewers and really starting to grow. But how does these small little breweries in 1960s California really become a catalyst for where we are today? Like what is that journey? What's going on?
I love that question, and I almost feel like I jumped ahead because, and if I'm gonna, Lucas told me I could share screen, so I'm gonna share something with you guys. And to get it answering some of that question, I'm gonna go ahead and talk about the 1940s in the US. And so in sharing screen, I'm gonna take you to craftbeer.com, and we have, it should pop up in a second. Hopefully you guys can see this now. This new timeline, that's part of our Major Beer Lover website, and it starts 1860, but let's not talk about that era. In Chicago at the Palmer House, which I have stayed at, the small brewers group or committee got together to meet and discuss securing tin for bottle caps. And so I think to get back to your question, Liz, when small brewers got representation as a collective group in whatever form, in the 40s through the Small Brewer Committee, even earlier than that from Brewers Association America. Later than that was us, Association of Brewers, that then became the Brewers Association. That's how you, I think, got things to advance. You had these passionate innovators who were making beer and brewing beer and what they had been turned on to from Europe or books. But when there was more of a groundswell, really was because there was multiple breweries popping up. And then you had advents such as the Great American Beer Festival competition. And Liz, I'll scroll through here and you chat. I could show you, I think, let's zip forward now to where Great American Beer Festival and the competition side started to pop and bring together beer lovers and get us to all think advanced quality of beer as well.
Well, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so really about the history of the history, right? You start in the 1940s, go into the 60s, and it's really about these home brewers who are sort of pushing the beer forward. And let's see, where are you in this? So we're in the 1970s, right?
Yeah, which was pivotal. And folks like Ray Daniels, who's on this Zoom call, can comment on this. Jimmy Carter made it legal to homebrew up to 200 gallons per family household. It was less if you were just an individual in a household. And that was a huge turning point. Serendipitous, and at the same time, Charlie Papazian was working with many others to get the American Homebrewers Association and Zymergy magazine going. And so that year is truly a turning point for homebrewing to get it legalized on the federal level. But then it took many years to have homebrewing be legal on the state by state level.
So you have this nationwide sort of beginnings, and then it filters down into states. Around what time would you say that there is definitely a widespread involvement in homebrewing?
Widespread involvement in homebrewing? It's an interesting one because we don't know all the numbers, right? Do we all stand up and get counted for every hobby we're doing? So that's a tough one. Today, and then we can talk backwards, there's more than 1 million active homebrewers that are self-identified based on surveys. I would say it took, in a parallel fashion, and anyone can supplement here, with homebrewing to pop, just like craft brewing had to pop and the beer culture had to emerge and change. I'll bring my second beer out to talk homebrewing history, as a matter of fact. I'm going into my cooler. Let me take you on a ride here. First of all, let me get rid of this background. Lose the background. Oh wow, now I'm really lost. I don't know how to lose the background and do this at the same time. Here's my cooler. There's Maple, my assist. She's my wingman. I'm gonna go to an American brown ale. And the reason American brown ale is super fun to talk about when it comes to home brewing is because it's one of those beer styles that homebrewers actually had the opportunity to influence. The English style browns were one version, but you had Texas homebrewers meeting with Fred Eckhart involved, believe it or not. I don't know if you guys can see this. This is City Star, awesome crowler, went to the brewery in Berthoud, little small town down the way. They filled this for me. The American brown ale is definitely a hoppier version of the English browns with more advanced malt notes, I would say. Look at that collar foam, it's gorgeous. And it's a great example of when homebrewers had an influence and now commercial brewers are brewing that beer.
So when people start home brewing, right, as of the 70s, well, before that and then into the 70s, what are some of these styles that are sort of hot? Or what are some of the styles that might be accessible, or sort of these entry level-ish styles that we can discuss some of these homebrewers back when this was all getting started?
I mean, this is an obvious answer. Anyone geeky enough to be on this call, because we all are, it's going to be answering it with the easy answer. American Pale Ale, you know, and Ray has studied this. Designing great beers is a great testament to home brewing and who is winning medals and advancing certain styles over the years. But American Pale Ale was truly a testament from Sierra that then got the rest of the world, I thinking, American hops and that type of style. And that really came on strong in the 80s and here forward. So that's my quick answer. I think it's an easy one. If you go to Great American Beer Festival and you look through the past entries, you've got the opportunity to look at the entry numbers in the GABF starting after 1982. And categories of what was entered and seeing the number of entries would tell you how strong a style was with the brewers in each year.
Everyone, well, we talked that a lot of people have a gateway beer into craft, right? I think people of my age group, I certainly am guilty of this. My gateway beer was certainly Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. I felt really old a couple of weeks ago when I was finding out that the next generation of beer drinkers said that their gateway beer was Half Acre Daisy Cutter. And I was like, wow, I'm old. But what was yours? What was that one?
I'll pull it out of my cooler. So I gotta say, the Sam Adams Boston Lager, I could talk for days about. It is a very nuanced, not quite Vienna lager, an Americanized amber lager. So not it's its own style, right? I'm looking for my opener, which is really a crime. I have it here somewhere. And it has low-level diacetyl. Many people don't notice that. Gives it a bump of mouthfeel, right? It uses decoction mashing. What? Really? So Americans that want to get to know craft beer's history should try Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, should try Sam Adams Boston Lager, should definitely engage with Brooklyn Lager, right? These heritage brands that are there are just so rewarding, and many of them, frankly, day in and day out, give you consistent, reliable taste, not of the past, but of the present. Because these type of recipes have evolved as well over time, documented as such. They're not frozen in time from the first time that I had this in my 20s, but this is a world-class beer.
It's such a great thing to see so many options, right? So many beer styles, so many new beer styles emerging, people interested in different things. There's really something for everyone, but at the same time, it really is quite comforting to know that I can still go to the store and get a Sierra Nevada. It's sort of all there for us, and it's curious to just take a look at that sort of spectrum of beers, and sort of certainly the approach and the history to it all.
You know, Liz, the week of March 15th, because I'll always think of COVID hitting March 13th, Friday the 13th was the first day I started working at home. And that week after, when everyone was like, is this real? Is this happening? What do we need to do? We were all still, if we allowed ourselves, engaging in shopping. And I made sure that week I bought myself, and it was the last on the shelf, and I was fine to grab that. I felt okay about it, not guilty. A 12-pack of Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, just because I wanted that in my fridge while the weirdness got weirder.
Yeah. It is sort of like a big hug to get back to those beers that have been around for so long. Everyone, please feel free to share in the chat room your gateway if you have one, anything else. Someone here has written, Puna Mendina wrote Sierra Nevada and Sam Adams Cherry Wheat. So a little 1-2 punch. Saranac Black Forest. Ray, you wrote, what'd you write? Sierra Nevada. What's BL?
SABL is Sam Adams Boston Lager.
Oh.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And Sam Adams Boston Ale is really good. If you can find that, buy that. It is a hidden gem.
Actually, Ray, I actually would like your perspective since you're actually here. It's a treat to have you here. You were sort of in the mix of all of this home brewing beginnings, and I feel that you and guys like Randy Mosier were really these people who were, I hope this is the right way to say it, true beer nerds, right? Beer geeks who were coming together, bringing people together, and sort of creating these, I guess, the 1.0 version of these mini beer festivals or beer gatherings. Is that right?
Well, yeah, I mean, we did a lot of cool things in Chicago. Randy's been at it a little longer than I have. I started homebrewing in 1989, so I just passed the 30-year mark. But Randy started at least 5 years before I did. But we happened to meet up in Chicago, and through the venue of the Chicago Beer Society, which any Chicago beer history or beer fan should know about, you know, we were able to do a lot of pretty cool things. We were instrumental in helping the National Homebrew Competition grow up and turn into a big deal. The first year I judged the National Homebrew Competition, all the first round judging was done in Colorado, in Boulder. And ever since then, it's been done through regional first rounds, which we ran some of the first of here in Chicago. But we did, beer and food pairings. We were doing the Chicago Beer Society was doing way back in the 80s. And we started doing, Real Ale Festival, a cask beer festival in the mid 90s. And that kind of gave birth to FOBAB, the Festival of Barrel Aged Beer that's going on now. So a lot of cool things grew out of the Chicago Beer Society.
Yeah, so I think like your story, Ray, and some of the things that Julia's been talking about, you know, really is a testament to how these just small group of people who create their own community really start having an influence on the bigger picture, right? And not just a national level, a global level too. You know, obviously, I mean, everyone in this virtual tap room right now, you guys are all beer nerds and beer geeks. So You guys know the story. You guys know how we've gotten here. But whenever I hear Ray talk, whenever I hear Randy talk, whenever I talk to Julia, and what the BA is doing, I say keep drinking that beer, keep making it at home, keep supporting each other. This beer community really is incredibly powerful and influential. And more than ever, we're going to need everyone's help now. For sure.
Yeah, and I'll add the word to that, fragile, right? And so that, I don't know if we're zipping too quick to today because there's more history to discuss, but it's such a fragile community that we all watched in whatever ways we were engaged with beer in our lives and our professions. Late 1800s, we had 4,100 plus breweries. Then last year, as 2019, Brewers Association, we documented 8,300, forgive me. And coming through the other side of COVID, we had in our April 7th impact survey that we published, 500 plus breweries responded to us, and 46% of them said they didn't think they could make it 1 to 3 months. I don't know if the numbers, though, when we now are going to finally getting back to this reopening kind of phase 2 of COVID, if the numbers will be as dismal as that, but they're not going to be great, and you're not going to have the same beer community that you used to in terms of the business side, which then will trickle out to the enthusiast side. So it's a very volatile era for so many, and health and livelihoods have been affected, and it gives me kind of goosebumps to think about, because beer is fun, right? That's why we're here. The connection to the community and what's in the glass, that's what it's all about. But that community, just like all of beverage and hospitality, has been completely disrupted by a global pandemic that nobody could have predicted. There were emerging discussions about it. I certainly wasn't talking about it when I was in New York on March, the first week of March. I was in New York City talking to journalists about beer. We were not talking about this. And 2 weeks later, it hit like nobody can describe.
Everyone, if you have questions for Julia, please go ahead and ask in the chat room. As we continue to talk, we will get to them, I promise. Thank you for all listing all of your gateway beers. There's so many good ones in here. Wow, I guess I never realized how many people actually went for that Boston Lager. It's definitely a good beer. Goose Island Honkers, for sure, one of my favorite early beers too. Okay, so before we get into the now, because I want to talk about a couple of other things. I want to talk about American Craft Beer Week and what it is and how it exists, how it all came to be. And I also want to talk a little bit about the indie beer label that was created. That was also a BA initiative. If there's anything you want to cover before we get into that, Julia, please feel free to share now.
Sure. Cheers to my next beer, by the way. Tasting a grapefruit Florida Goza. The fruited Gozas are super fun trend in my view. This is from Crooked Thumb in Florida. Super refreshing. And how do I kick it off? It is American Craft Beer Week. I think, Liz, that's why we pegged this discussion to now, which is a great opportunity. Ray Daniels, again, back to, I walk in many great footsteps, including in the footsteps of Ray, who paved the path for me. He had my job at the BA before me. And we used to have American Beer Month created under Ray's watch. I remember at a fateful Philadelphia Craft Brewers Conference, sitting in on a somewhat contentious, somewhat enthusiastic talk that Ray was leading on what to do with American Craft Beer Month, or Craft Beer, or Beer Month at the time, and it evolved to a week. And it was in May to get ahead of the summer selling season when brewers weren't too crazy and busy. And so 2006, we have had American Craft Beer Week since then. And now we just have this reimagined National Beer Week that we would have been on autopilot, but we wanted to bring it back for 2020. And this is what it looks like. We're asking people to commit to give craft beer on craftbeer.com. You can do that, put in the form. It doesn't cost any money, just in spirit, committing to give, saying what brewery saying who you're going to give it to. And it definitely does tie back to the Independent Craft Brewer seal and independent craft breweries, who are more than 90% of today's 8,300 breweries. And I'm happy to talk about anything else you might want to know.
Last thing that I want to ask about is this beer movie you're in.
Oh yeah, beer movie. So there is an opportunity, I think, when people get approached by artists and the artists convince you that you are a worthy subject for their story. Sometimes things take longer than expected to get to fruition for anyone that's been involved in the film industry. But the beer movie, and let me see if I can link to it while we're chatting. It just launched, and the reason there's such beauty in this, and I'll pull it up in a second, the trailer, is because it reminds me of the excitement and the feeling we had about beer pre-COVID, right? It's definitely an international film. It looks at a Vienna brewer, talks to Peter Buchart from Purpose Brewing in Colorado, features me homebrewing on my back patio, that Baltic cherry porter that I talked about. And it gets at the business of beer, but it fully documents the beauty of beer. And I would encourage everyone, if they want to watch a $5 rentable on Vimeo, beautiful movie about beer that just dropped, consider it.
I think we have the link somewhere. If not, we'll post it right in here, this chat room.
Oh yeah, do that. I'm gonna let my dog out, who's totally going crazy right now. Here it is. See if I can launch this. Oh, here we go.
Yes.
Go on. So it's a 2-minute trailer, but one of the comments made in the trailer that I just love is that one of the brewers they're interviewing says, people don't want to just buy our beer, they want to buy our values. And it is so poignant. I was truly impressed. I'm going to use that line here forward.
So yeah, the link to the Vimeo was just posted. The exact name of it is Beer, the Best Film Ever Brewed, naturally. All right, please ask questions before we wrap up and let Julia get back to life and such. I'm trying to see if I see any questions in this chat room. Great Lakes. Yes, that's a good first early brewery.
Definitely.
Oh, someone is Jamaican, so the first beer was Red Stripe. That's a fun beer.
That chunky bottle, the Stubbies.
Yeah. You know what's interesting too is that a lot of I keep saying to people, which is great for me, is that history is hot, right? So there are a lot of these, what I would say, legacy brands that are really digging into their deep history to almost become relevant again, right? Or to almost justify that they belong in this game, which is really quite interesting to me.
Yeah, the comfortable and familiar.
Sure. Patrick wants to know more about Jimmy Carter signing the homebrew bill.
Yeah, I wasn't there. Ray, do you have any good briefing on that? Mine's pretty higher level. I just have always been psyched that it was passed. I know none of the politics.
Hey, I wasn't there either.
But you've probably spoken to it more.
No, I think Jimmy just happened to be in the right place at the right time.
People were ready.
I mean, it is truly a moment worth, I think, pursuing. It gets lost a lot of the time and not even mentioned, but it was a turning point when you have the president of the United States happily, and you can Google it and find images of it signing the bill. I'd love to know more about the behind the scenes on how that came to be, but it's the right thing. And I also believe at the time you were already allowed to make wine at home.
Yeah.
I mean, wine has always had more of the legislative and regulatory graces. For example, with COVID and the direct to, shipping that we're all enjoying now, we're able to get breweries to deliver to us out of nowhere. We're able to now, get curbside pickup from the curb. Shipping is going on where it wasn't before. That is, another great example of kind of a pivotal moment, and the behind the scenes of what's going on is because of COVID. But what will stick from that is, I think, the big question. And so these moments in history that seem small literally then can lead to, say, the craft brewing community that's now 161,007 people as of 2019 strong for full and direct part-time jobs. And a lot of that happened because Jimmy Carter had his pen out in 78.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, if you look at also history through time, when certain, I want to say, I don't necessarily want to say tragedies, but certain sort of, you have sort of people pushing a message in not the most best way. Sometimes what happens is it takes a little time. Change will happen, and then take a little bit of time for the next version of that change. So if you're looking at the 1970s, right, that's almost 50 years after Prohibition ending. And so it's almost like there's a whole new couple of generations that are wanting a little bit more, right? Like, give us a little bit more freedom now here. And you have different generations also leading the way politically, economically. So sometimes it's sort of like all of this perfect formula for all of these things to happen. And that's sort of what I've seen as a pattern in history. So for Jimmy Carter to be at the right place, right, is sort of par for the course. We have a question from Elizabeth. Can you talk a little bit about the regions of the country in the 1980s and 1990s that were sort of hotbeds for craft beer?
I do believe that the regions, and it came up a little bit, and great question, it went west to east because of the California movement. You'd have to take a look at the advancement of hops in the Pacific Northwest, which today, at least, the U.S. supplies a third of the hops comes from the Idaho, Washington, and Oregon, which is amazing. So I think the agricultural component had some play there. Also, Idaho and other states that were prolific in barley really would weigh in there, and where the hop processing facilities were, along with the malting facilities. So now I jump to the East Coast and think about Breese, malting, and other facilities that helped ingredients get more local. And it's not getting specifically at the 80s, but triggered by Breese, and the thought there is that they made a commitment to have malted barley available on the small scale purchasing side for volume. So homebrewing, and back to that, really was fortunate to be able to thrive because companies and, we call them allied trade or ingredient suppliers, went for the notion that they weren't just going to sell large volume to big brewers. They were going to make smaller volume to smaller brewers, and even on the home brew side. So there's a lot to talk about. And then, pre-2000, really jumping ahead, Colorado was not necessarily a beer mecca. Sure, we had GABF, Great American Beer Festival, since the 80s. But I think it really took a while for things to pop. And in 2006, when the Brewers Association merged with the Brewers Association of America, and you at the same time, or that was 2005, and then at the same time in 2006, you had the craft brewer definition created. I think that really started to create that community, and Ray was involved behind the scenes on that. To talk about small brewers, you had to define who you were talking about. So that created the ability for a collective voice for all these little pockets and regions in the country to bind together to get some attention and talk about the needs that they had to have addressed. And in 2013 and 14, we had finally the passage of all 50 states allowing home brewing. And also in that same 2-year time frame, finally we had 50 state brewers guilds. And so every state had its advancement And it just took a while. Some brewers guilds actually have been around since pre-2000 era, but not many. So I really think things started to pop at the turn of the century for the home brewing movement and craft.
Jumping to right now, present day, not really thinking about COVID, what are some of the areas of the country that we should be watching out for?
Well, you guys are the beer geeks, you know, beercations. I can't wait till I can go back on those. I've been to so many. I'm a domestic warrior. In my career, I'm not the lucky guy or gal that gets to go to all the, you know, emerging countries that have our export development program and craft kind of, you know, in demand overseas. I love going to places like, you know, Lincoln, Nebraska, Kearney, Nebraska. I was in December, freezing cold, amazing grower and brewer conference. And boy, were they killing it. And I saw Thunderhead on here on the chat. Somebody's drinking a Thunderhead. Thunderhead and what Trevor's doing is amazing. So like, I like going to the unknown or the not as talked about emerging markets. Boise, Idaho, I was in last year and it blew me away. I still can't get over what Paige and Mike are doing in Boise, and the breweries there are fully popping at Payette. That's the brewery. I've been to Great Falls, Montana, right, for the bloggers conference. Why are we here? I literally got on the plane. I kept complaining, why am I going here? Why am I going here? This is a beer conference. Well, because it's the barley mecca. And the growers that spoke to us for a 3-day period from academic institutions and the research facilities were able to show us how they are cutting edge on what's going on with barley in the US. So there's just so many pockets. And then the South is kind of really coming along because the regulatory environment was just not there. And so now that the laws have changed, like, God, go to Texas. I was there at the end of February and into March, right before my New York trip. And, you know, what I witnessed in Texas is just such, advocacy and excitement for beer. And they're doing it grassroots and scrappy style and making world-class kick-ass beer.
So basically, go anywhere and you're going to find a great beer culture, great beer scene. Okay. I'll put in one more question if I can see it here from any of that. Ray, what's your favorite part of the world to drink in?
Oh, wherever my my hat is. You know, for a long time I wasn't doing any home brewing, and I had people that asked me, you know, are you still homebrew? And I'd always say, well, you know, it turns out you have to be home to homebrew. And you know, you just heard some of Julia's travel schedule, and she's almost entirely domestic. I spent a bunch of years not only doing the domestic travel, but also international travel, flying, you know, more than 100,000 miles a year around the world a couple of times. And I just couldn't homebrew. I didn't, you know, you'd be home for 2 or 3 weeks and you could start a batch, but then you'd have to leave and, you know, then it just goes bad sitting in the tank. So now that I'm home more and particularly the last 6 or 8 weeks, yeah, I had the opportunity to homebrew, and I've really, really been excited about the beers that I have made. I really like that Saison. I've got a British bitter I've made. They've both been just fantastic. Totally enjoying them. So it's great.
Awesome. Okay, everybody. Little Rock, Arkansas. Someone's a fan of that. Austin. Memphis. Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's sort of like driving any direction and you'll be able to find something fantastic. We're incredibly fortunate to be around such great beer makers and a great beer community. And fortunate to have people like Ray who have paved the way, and Julia for sure, who has become a very important voice in beer, an advocate, someone who certainly talks about beer a lot, but does it so passionately that it's infectious and that's why I always love to have her, be around her whenever it's possible. So thank you, Julia, for being such a great ambassador and advocate for all of this, and for certainly being a big supporter of the Brewseum. We're lucky to have you and be a part of all this magic. Brewersassociation.org is where you can find more about the work that the BA is doing. Craftbeer.com, also a great resource connected to the BA. So check those out. American Craft Beer Week goes until the 17th. So go out and enjoy some great American craft beer. You can get back to all that global stuff next week. But in the meantime, this week, enjoy the craft beer. Any last thing you want to share with us, Julia?
Just good beers to you each, good health to you each. There's so much information out there, and it is an honor of mine to share that the National Association is such a great source for beer lovers. Craftbeer.com, homebrewers, homebrewersassociation.org, brewersassociation.org, and the beer books that we publish. You know, we're a very diversified organization that's also going through changing times, hit by COVID and really hard, you know, changes. But we're all going to get through this. Just we have to stay healthy, and we have to support each other. So thank you for supporting me on a random Tuesday. I look forward to this for weeks since Liz set it up, and it's been a true treat.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Julia. Appreciate all your work and your time. Everybody, thank you again for joining us for another Brewseum virtual event. We've been doing this since mid-March, a couple times a week. We'll be back here Thursday talking about Prohibition era history with Karen Abbott and talk about her new book, The Ghosts of Eden Park. Check out everything we're doing on chicagobrewseum.org. Consider throwing in a few bucks our way for our nonprofit efforts, if you can, to support all the contents and programming that we've been doing gratis. Thank you all again, and hope you all have a great evening. Bye.